Hi guys, welcome back. This segment we're going to talk about the Chinese embassy, and Andrew's going to give us an update to the
What are the others?
pre-planning meeting that you attended. Andrew, fire away. What happened? And at this meeting.
So on Monday night, we had a meeting of the Strategic Development Committee, and their role is to make planning decisions on large applications in Tower Hamlets. But in this particular case, they had what's called a pre-application discussion. So the idea is before the developer, or in this case, the Chinese government, submit a full and proper planning application, which will have thousands of pages of documents behind it, is they basically make a presentation to the councillors on that committee and kind of giving them some idea of what they're working on with some pictures so that councillors can provide some feedback in advance of a formal planning application. So it was really the first public discussion of some of the issues that we have with the Chinese embassy moving from central London to Tower Hamlets. And what's really interesting about this is it will be our first embassy. We've never had an embassy in Tower Hamlets before, so it raises, two main issues. The first is to do with planning, and this is, lots of really interesting planning stuff, which I'll talk about in a second. And then the second main issue is just the politics of the Chinese government embassy moving to Tower Hamlets and our issues with the actions of the Chinese government with Uyghur Muslims in Hong Kong, Tibet, and also other issues as well.
Well, it's a big, massive strategic decision by the Chinese government. I think it's their biggest embassy. It's going to be, and the new Chinese ambassador as well. They've replaced the Chinese ambassador. The new Chinese ambassador is quite a senior figure in the Chinese Communist Party. So they see this embassy as a strategic hub in terms of diplomacy and other factors as well. This probably because it's close to the City of London, but also the Chinese government through various entities has massive investments, especially in Newham, and I've heard also in the Canary Wharf as well. So it's sort of like a very strategic decision. And speaking to people who are sort of like keen China observers, the Chinese government, they plan everything out. It's a very long-term decision for them. So they are here to stay for the long term, and it is a strategic decision. But it does cause questions as well. It puts Tower Hamlets as a borough on an international map and in the crosshair of the Chinese government. And how do we actually respond, not just to the Chinese government, but also you're probably going to get more and more embassies moving in. I know there's a shift in terms of government departments moving into Tower Hamlets from Whitehall to Canary Wharf. If that happens, you can see embassies moving in as well. It makes much more financial sense in terms of you get better amenities for lower costs, while you could just sell an asset that and it's cheaper. Are we ready for this kind of stuff as Tower Hamlets Council or as a borough?
Well, I mean, so that was part of the discussion on Monday night was, this issues we've never had to confront before. So the two issues I raised in particular, one was protests. We're going to have regular protests outside this building. And those protests will probably be on, pavements owned by Tower Hamlets Council. So what are we going to do to kind of, make sure those protests are safe in terms of traffic? Because there's lots of vehicles passing that spot. The second issue is to do with terrorism. So one of my founding memories was the truck bombs that hit the embassies in Beirut in the early 1980s, and then in the mid 90s, then the attacks in Kenya and sort of Dar es Salaam as well. And I think it's going to be a very interesting discussion is this balance between access to a site, because the third important point about the site is it's one of the most historic sites actually in Tower Hamlets. And interestingly enough is, our first major pandemic in England, the Black Death, which killed perhaps up to a third of the population, is a lot of the people from London who died in the Black Death were actually buried on this site. So it raises some quite profound archaeological issues as well. And the issue that was the main issue on the Monday night was this debate between wanting people to have access to a very important site within Tower Hamlets, but the absolutely legitimate needs of an embassy, and especially the Chinese embassy, to be secure as well from attack or from protests, and trying to find the balance between the two. We've never had to really have that debate before. And then lots of really technical stuff about, because there will be between 200 and 300 staff working on site, around 230 apartments, about 150 car parking spaces. So there's lots of really interesting kind of, well, I find it interesting anyway, planning type stuff. And the other sort of issue for us as well is that because this is such an important building, and both at a local and national, and I'd argue global political stage, is that we have to be quite careful in how we handle this planning decision within Tower Hamlets, because if we mess this up, then either the Mayor of London will call it in, as he did with Bishopsgate, Goods Yard, or else probably more likely Robert Jenrick, as the Secretary of State, the government minister responsible, will call it in, as he has done on some other sites not far away, and it will override whatever we want to do. So I think we have to play this with a straight bat. But at the same time, many of us have, real deep concerns about the actions of the Chinese Communist Party in a number of areas. And how do we find the balance between those two is going to be very interesting in the coming months and years.
I think it sort of like makes international issues also local issues as well. And I think it'd be an interesting development in local politics, how we sort of like dovetail those two issues. But speaking to residents, so I live sort of like around a walking distance away from the site. There is a large social housing estate, the Royal Mint estate there, and also on the street behind the Chinese embassy is a lot of sheltered housing as well, which are social housing as well. And just speaking to the residents, they would want improvements as well. So like I know they've received letters from the Chinese embassy, and I think the Chinese embassy has appointed public affairs consultants to actually engage with them. But they would like some kind of uplift in the area as well. So the Chinese embassy is benefiting from the location. They would want some of that investment or improvements to go into the area around it, where they feel that because they're at the periphery of the borough, they're kind of like not thought about in terms of investment when it comes to political decision making in Tower Hamlets. So they feel that the much needed investment, this is an opportunity for much needed investment in the area to actually improve the environment. Especially there's a park there, Royal Mint Gardens or something like that, and it's just completely abandoned. You talk to the residents, it's just like a grassy knoll with overgrown trees. Most people a lot of people just use it to walk their dogs, so that irritates the residents because there's nothing else there. So it's things to think about, as well as to how we could use this opportunity to actually benefit the area. Was there any discussions about investments in terms of improving public amenities around the area? Was there any discussions around that?
So as one of the questions I asked was about something called community infrastructure levy, which is in effect a tax on developers. So if you want to build a new residential block in my area, then you will need to pay the council sort of like £260 per square metre. And I asked the question, would an embassy attract or have to pay the community infrastructure levy? And the council's reports have said yes, which would mean that this site will generate for Tower Hamlets Council potentially millions of pounds in community infrastructure levy. And then the question is, how and where is that money spent? And that's another big battle, which I'm sure we'll talk about in future shows as well. But in theory, the money will be there. But the main discussion on Monday night was more about the public realm and the sort of the pavements outside and the access, less about the area behind where people actually live. So
how much, because it's on a red route, just going a bit technical, I think they're kind of clever in the way that they've chose a site, because it's on a red route, so it's very difficult to do the protests. So what's going to happen is all the protests are going to come to the rear of the embassy, adjoining that social housing estate. Did people were there any discussions about that? Because they kind of like bought an island, so it's kind of clever
Yeah.
as a site if you're thinking about protests to have that, which puts pressure on the residents, sort of. That's.
Well, I mean, the interesting thing is that, and one of the reasons why it was actually a good choice by the Chinese government, it was built as a fortress, because within that building originally was the Royal Mint. So all of the money in the United Kingdom that was printed, or the coins that were made on that site. So it was already built as a really secure site with strong walls around it. And those walls are grade 2 listed. So even if the Chinese wanted to knock those walls down, we wouldn't allow them to knock those walls down, because, you know, they are of historic importance. So from that perspective, it was a good choice. My personal opinion is that the protests are more likely to happen in front of the building, because then as a backdrop, you've got the Tower of London, you've got Tower Bridge just down the road, and there is a bit of space for a protest of a certain size. But if there were to be thousands of people protesting, it becomes really difficult in that area, because just the traffic and all the other issues. So I don't know where protesters would go, but I suspect they would go to the front of the building, because they probably wouldn't even know where to go at the back. And that's the kind of thing that we as Tower Hamlets Council are going to have to plan ahead for, because we will have to take some responsibility for the safety of those people, because they will be standing on council-owned property when they protest.
Got you. When do you think they're going to submit their planning? Did they indicate when the actual planning is going to be submitted in these?
I'm not. That's a good question. I'm not sure that was made clear. I suspect normally, if you're having the meeting in February, that normally means that you want to submit your planning application in the summer. Would normally be the way the process works. And the Chinese bought this site in 2018, so it's already been 3 years since they acquired it. So my guess would be planning application in the summer, and then a decision probably in early 2022 would be my best guess.
Gotcha. Well, we'll keep you up to date with the Chinese embassy if they do put in an application, or if there is any other further developments. We'll keep you abreast in this program. So we're going to go into a short break. After the break, Andrew and I are going to answer some questions that were posed to us by residents. So tune in after the break and join us to listen to some of the answers to some of the questions that you pose to us.